Okay, so when we left off, we talked about informative speeches. And it's imperative that when you deliver a speech, whether it be an informative speech, a persuasive speech, anything you're talking about, you need to be the most informed, knowledgeable person in the room about that topic. You're the one that did the research. You darn well better be right. So that means solid research, understanding your topic, and providing evidence about where you got your research from. Tell us where you heard that from. Be able to anticipate and answer questions about the material. So, how do you become an expert? How do you become the most knowledgeable person in the room? Read. Read. You have to read. Do your research. Read all about it. Read books, magazines, newspapers, websites, all of the above.
Hey, Professor, just because you read something doesn't mean it's true, does it?
Anybody can have a website. Anybody can put up videos on YouTube. It doesn't mean they're right. So just because you're reading something doesn't mean it's right.
Some websites are pulling information right out of their...
So how do you evaluate your sources? First thing is ask questions about the sources. When someone tells you something, or if you read something, always ask, how do they know that? How do you know that? Where'd you hear that from? Get the answers to that question. If you can't answer that question, you lose credibility. If your source doesn't provide that, then that source loses credibility. This is why when you're giving a speech, you need to cite your sources. We call those oral footnotes. So when you make any claim, when you tell us something bold or new or something that goes against what we might think, tell us where you heard the information and we'll be more likely to believe you. This is something I got off Facebook, but I like it and I share it with my class. When you're evaluating your sources, ask and answer these questions. Number one, who's telling me this? Number two, how does he or she know this? Number three, given the answers to 1 and 2, is it possible that he or she is wrong? If the answer to number 3 is yes, it is possible that he or she is wrong, then find another unrelated source. Look it up, find more details on this. And then step 5, repeat until the answer to number 3 is pretty darn unlikely. Until then, assume you're hearing BS. All right? Find unrelated sources that can verify claims. So when you're evaluating sources, these are good places to start. Books. Books can be wrong. But generally speaking, a publisher is not going to spend a lot of money publishing a book that's going to be found false. All right? You'd still want to find verifiable sources that can confirm what's in the book. But generally speaking, books are strong sources of evidence. Academic journals are another strong source. Academic journals are journals written by professors for an audience of other professors in their field. This means they are peer-reviewed. Every article that is submitted by a professor goes through a screening process in which 5 or 6 other faculty members from other schools, people who don't know the author and don't know who the author is, they analyze what is written in that study. And they determine, well, yes, the methodology is good, the findings are clear. We'll publish this. Or, the methodology is weak, the findings not really very conclusive. We recommend not publishing this. So if it's in a peer-reviewed journal, this makes a strong case for solid evidence. Another great source, magazines with a reputation for solid journalism. Solid journalism is a great source as well. We'll talk about news sources in more detail as we go on. Another great resource is government websites. Government websites provide data that is analyzed about a wide variety of topics, especially the economy and the population. Those are very important things that the government keeps track of. So here's census.gov. Let's type in a search. We'll compare Wayne County, Michigan with Oakland County, Michigan. Okay, and here's what pops up for Wayne County. 2019 population estimates 1.75 million. Median household income $47,301. Almost 20% of people in Wayne County live in poverty. 86% have a high school education or higher. 7.6% don't have health insurance. Median housing value is $113,000. Let's compare that to Oakland County. You can find tons of other stats on here, by the way. These are just quick ones that pop up as a quick glance of each community. You can also break it down by city, by zip code. You can break things down by county or state. It's an absolutely important resource to have. So let's compare this. Let's compare Wayne County to Oakland County. And here we go. So let's compare that to Oakland County. 2019, 1.25 million. Median household income, almost $80,000. That's $30,000 a year higher. 7.8% of persons live in poverty. Way fewer than Wayne County. 94% have a high school education. Median housing value, $242,000. That's more than twice as much as Wayne County. So you can find great data on census.gov and other government websites, and they're 100% reliable. They're credible sources. You can find a wealth of information there. For other websites, does it have a trusted name? Is it a website that's been around for a long time, that has a reputation? Reputation is critical for finding good resources. That's why it's difficult for newer websites to get started out. They have to do something that builds them a reputation. Advocacy websites, the textbook talks more about these, and information websites. You can find lots of details, lots of stats and facts, and a lot of times a lot of emotional stories in those websites. WorldAdvocacy.com has a list of advocacy websites. Some of them are more credible than others, but you can analyze that for yourself as you look at the data and the facts they present it and the way they present it. For example, PETA.org, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, is listed on this site as an advocacy website. I would not use PETA as a source. PETA is notorious for framing things in a way that is often inaccurate. For example, PETA refers to artificial insemination, the process of getting cows pregnant. They refer to that in some literature as raping cows. They say that farmers rape cows to get them pregnant. Total BS. This is false. That's misleading use of language. PETA has an incredibly low level of reliability. It's the same organization that criticized President Obama for swatting a fly.
Sorry, I'm going to start over. Hey, get out of here.
That's the most persistent fly I've ever seen. Nice.
All right, so if you're going to trust that organization, I'm going to doubt your paper. Don't cite PETA. All right, we'll talk about some other websites that are on the same low level. Information websites, these are things like Medline Plus or MayoClinic.com. You can find information about diseases or medical conditions. Under no circumstances should you try to diagnose yourself based on information from a website. That is going to get you into a whole lot of trouble. What about news? Most of my students ask this, well, what about news sources? Can I trust the news? And the answer is you can trust some news. You need to understand there's a difference between news and journalism and commentary or opinions. The goal of journalism and actual news is to inform the public about what's going on, whether it be an event or an issue. The goal of commentary is to persuade us about something going on in the news, to sway our opinions. And the problem with identifying reliable news sources is that some sources blur the lines between commentary and news content. Broadcast news, in particular CNN and Fox News, do this quite frequently. They blur the line between news and commentary about the news. Opinions might be valid or they might not. They should be based on facts. They are not always based on facts. Here are some news sources that are reliable. These are trustworthy news sources. Major daily newspapers, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, the Christian Science Monitor. These are solid journalistic newspapers. Any daily newspaper in a major city is a reliable source for journalism. News, again, is separate from the commentary section in those newspapers or on those websites. So make sure you're reading the news and not the opinion section, not the commentary section. So the Free Press in Detroit is a great source. Crane's Detroit Business is an excellent source about business news. The Detroit News is an excellent, reliable source of journalism that covers Detroit. The USA Today. How about broadcasting? National Public Radio is an excellent source. British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, is a great source. PBS, Public Broadcasting System, excellent source of factual reporting. The CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, an excellent, excellent source of journalism. I would rate it higher than any broadcast news in the United States, and I teach broadcast journalism. CBC is outstanding. Actual news, the news programs from ABC News, NBC News, and CBS News are also very reliable. Those are credible news sources. So let's take a look at this chart. This is a chart about media bias. Most of my students have heard of media bias, and it's impossible for anybody who's covering something to be totally free from bias. But to try to cover something as objectively as possible is what journalists do. So this chart is designed to illustrate which news sources are reputable and which ones are not. If you look at the top, if we go down the left side, we see original fact reporting and fact reporting. Those are elements of news. The top reputable sources are listed in this green box. So on the left side of the page, we see liberal media, and on the right side, we see conservative. And so if we look at this, liberal, utter garbage conspiracy theories, anything over here on the extreme left falls into that category. Hyper-partisan liberal, which means it expressly promotes views, that shows up in this column. Skews liberal but still reputable shows up down through this column. Mainstream, minimal partisan bias shows up in the middle. And skews conservative, we move over here a little bit to the right. Hyper-partisan conservative, and then conservative, utter garbage conspiracy theories are on the far right. So anything in this green box is a reputable source. All right, you've got the Associated Press, Bloomberg, Reuters, AFP, ABC, CBS, NBC, NPR, The Hill, the BBC, Al Jazeera, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. All of those are great, reliable sources. Now, Down farther, in the yellow box, we see what is described as complex analysis or opinion with fair persuasion. Both sides of the political spectrum have this. On the left side, we see The Intercept, The New Yorker, The Nation, The Week. On the right side, we see The National Review, Weekly Standard, Reason.com, and Washington Examiner, Washington Times, and The American Conservative. These move toward the more hyper-partisan as we go farther out to the sides. Moving down here, we see an orange box. This means it's selective or incomplete story, unfair persuasion, and it's unfair interpretations of the news inside this orange rectangle. So that would include The Federalist, The Drudge Report, OAN, The New York Post. On the left side, Alternate, New Republic, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post. Down into the red, this is where it's utter garbage and conspiracy theories and propaganda that contains misleading facts or inaccurate or fabricated information. And down here we see Forward Progressives, U.S. Uncut, Occupy Democrats, Palmer Report. On the right side, at the very bottom of the barrel, InfoWars, The Blaze, Red State, Newsmax. These are not reliable sources. Fox News, not a reliable source. They provide unfair interpretations of the news. They give nonsense that's damaging to the public discourse, propaganda and misleading facts, and inaccurate and fabricated information. So avoid anything red or orange when you're citing sources. Some of these sources may have some facts in them, but that means you need to find another source that can verify what these untrustworthy news outlets or publications, they're not real news, these publications are spewing. All right, so anything in yellow and green, you're safe using those. Anything in orange or red, avoid those. I hope that helps. I will post this media bias chart on Blackboard. So news is a good source if you have a reliable news outlet. Make sure you do. Evaluating your sources. Always ask, what is the authority of this source? Who's the expert here? Are the writers experts? And if not, which experts are they interviewing? How accurate is the source? Are there mistakes? Factual mistakes? Be very careful. Mistakes in writing and grammar? Be careful, but we see those popping up more and more, even in reputable news publications, because they're cutting costs and eliminating copy editors. The people who proofread are just being phased out for budget cuts, so they can still make mistakes. Does the website or news source provide the sources? Do they tell you where they got their info? If not, a little red light should be going off in your head. Does the organization have an agenda to persuade? All right, Fox News, of course it does. Occupy Democrats, absolutely they do. Is the website objective? PETA, absolutely not. BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics.gov, yes, it's objective. All right, so ask these questions anytime you're analyzing a source and trying to determine whether something is right. If you see a claim online, ask this, and you're not sure about it. If it seems a little sketchy, go to factchecked.org, politifact.com if it's a political claim, or snopes.com. These are great sources that do investigative journalism to track down false claims and identify them and find the sources of these false claims. So always ask these questions as well. What type of website am I looking at? Is the author or the agency identified? Does the author have appropriate credentials to address the issue? Does it contain links to other information on the subject or citations? These things are vital. So in that case, Wikipedia can be a reliable source if you use it to start out. Find out where the citations are coming from and then cite those after you read them. Is the material objective or biased? Do other authorities confirm this information? Is the material up to date? And does it have breadth and depth? Those are excellent things to ask. So now I will ask you a question. Which of these sources would you say is credible? A blog? A social media post? Something a professor said in class? Something your friend's father told you? Something your grandmother told you? My grandmother said, never trust a man who kicks a dog. Your own observations. Which of these is a reliable source? Which of these sources is credible? So the answer is they all can be credible, but they all need a little more evidence, all right? A blog. Anybody can have a blog. A social media post, the same thing. People get paid to come up with false or misleading social media posts. People in the US, people in Russia and China get paid to come up with these things to mislead us, all right? You could have a job doing this someday. I hope you don't, all right? Something a professor said in class. I would hope your professor is right. You should expect me to be right on things related to public speaking and communication studies. If we're talking about documentary film or broadcasting, I think I'm probably going to be right. I would be a very reliable source. If I'm telling you something about some other field, medicine, chemistry, then you better double check it. I actually was the director of the honors program for a few years, and one of my students did her honors thesis about science majors. I hope you laugh at this. Something about cations in one of her research projects that she did for her thesis. And I was looking at it, I saw the abstract, and I was like, oh my gosh, you have a typo there. You were trying to write actions, and it says cations. She goes, oh no, that's a real word. I'm like, oh. So yeah, don't trust me on things related to chemistry. But a chemistry professor? Yes, trust that chemistry professor. If the chemistry professor is telling you about broadcast news, better double check that. All right? Same with something your grandmother told you. Where'd you hear it? Your friend's father could be right, or your friend's father could be out in left field. Your own observations, probably reliable, but we all have our own biases and we all see things differently. All right? So unless you can confirm these with other sources, assume it's BS. All right? And then always dig deeper and keep asking questions. Where did they get this information? If you do this, you'll be much more credible when you give your speech. You can tell us where you got your information, and we're more likely to believe you. So if you are the expert, which you should be, then you can tell us where you got your information. So oral footnotes are when you are giving a speech and you say something like, now some people think that you're supposed to brush your teeth up and down, but new research says you should go back and forth. And I got that from this article, blah, blah, blah. But provide oral footnotes, especially for things that people might say, huh? I remember one time one of my students told me about, she was giving a speech about ingredients that we might not realize are in some of the fast foods we eat. And Wendy's chili, she said, has silica or sand in it to help keep the texture. I was like, damn. And I forgot what food from McDonald's it was. It has duck feathers, little pieces of duck feathers in it. I was like, what? But she did not give an oral footnote. So while she's doing the rest of her speech, I'm getting out my phone trying to find out if this is true. All right, and it turns out it's true in a twisted kind of way. In a literal sense, it could be taken as true. In a more realistic sense, no, it's BS. But she didn't give oral footnotes. She didn't tell us where she got that information. And so while we're sitting there questioning it, she's moved on to 3 other points, and we missed those 3 other points because we're looking up the facts to see if she's right. So when something is in doubt or something is controversial, give an oral footnote. It'll help your audience understand things better.
Wow, that makes total sense to me.
So when you give your speech, you need to have facts and supporting materials to support what you're saying. I think we talked about this in the other lecture, but facts and statistics are excellent forms of evidence. Testimony is another great form of evidence. Examples, narratives, and quotations, these are great. When you do a speech, whether it be an informative speech or a persuasive speech, your evidence should not just take these forms. You should have evidence that appeals to our emotions, appeals to pathos or pathos, and appeals to logos, our sense of logic or rational thought. So tell us something that connects to our head, that's the facts and statistics, but tell us something that touches our hearts, touches our emotions. That helps us remember it. That connects us to that information. So you need to be able to connect on 3 levels, all 3 of Aristotle's appeals: ethos, pathos, and logos. And if you connect on all 3, you have a more powerful speech. And your supporting materials should include all of those things. In my sample speech, I tell you that everyone has the ability to produce and direct a documentary film. All right? You have a cell phone, so you can shoot and edit. It's easier to edit on a computer, but it's possible to edit on a cell phone. All right? So I'm going to back that up by saying this. Here's a fact to support that. Most cell phone cameras are good enough for shooting a documentary. How do I know? Well, from digitaltrends.com/mobile/best-cheap-smartphones. You can look that up. All right, but I did look it up and I have a citation to prove what I said. It's a reliable source.
I mean, this is cool, Professor, but how many more slides? I think I'm going to need a refill.
How do I know you have a cell phone? Common sense says duh. But according to the Pew Research Center in 2020, 96% of college-age Americans own a smartphone. I can give testimony as well. This is another part of supporting material. I've shot 5 documentaries using my cell phones and going back to a Galaxy S3, which I got in 2012. All right, so that's my testimony, my expert testimony as a documentary filmmaker who's won numerous awards for documentary films. All right, so that is expert testimony. So if I wanted to give a narrative to talk about how you can create cell phone documentaries, I would tell this story. Well, I'm weaving in multiple stories, and I'll throw in a little clip here. When we adopted our first son from the foster system, I took tons of videos and edited a documentary for his adoption party. Great little story. He doesn't like to watch it because I've got this little clip where he pinches his finger in the door and cries, and it makes him sad. But it's otherwise a great story. So then my wife got pregnant, and I said, you know what? I'm going to document this. We weren't expecting it. It was an unexpected, we call him our miracle baby. And so I've got videos from the moment she took the test all the way up till she gave birth and beyond. And I made a documentary for my son's 1-year birthday party, and everybody loved that. And then in 2020, we were in quarantine, and I made a documentary about our family's experience through that rough year. All right. And it was a great video. My little son wakes up in the morning and he says, Daddy, can we watch 2020 today? Because he wants to watch the documentary about the fun things they did in 2020. It brings him back to the good old days of the pandemic. So these films are now our family treasures that'll be with us forever and help us tell our story. So they're very important to us. So these are evidence, supporting materials and evidence that back up my thesis that everyone, anyone, you have the ability and the tools to shoot, edit, and direct a documentary film using your cell phone. So that's an example speech that I give. I'll put the outline on Blackboard to show that to you. And you can see how the evidence backs up the claims that I'm making. So when you give a speech, you need to be the most knowledgeable person in the room. You need to have good supporting materials that prove your case and touch our hearts as well as our minds. If you can do that, you've generally got a very powerful speech, whether it be an informative speech or a persuasive speech, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. Thank you.